I wanted to expand on the previous topic related to RPGs and critical mass, though in this video I want to specifically focus on women and the effect they may have or might have had on RPGs, both games that you play on the PC or I guess on console and elsewhere. Now, in my older video on Pumpkin Spice Latte, I addressed this reasonably extensively. I cited some stats. They were anecdotal, of course, because there aren't hard stats on the amount of women that play pen and paper role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, what have you, but they've always been vanishingly small, which is to say, women, generally speaking, aren't that interested in traditional role-playing games. Now, at first glance, or first thought, you might think, that's kind of strange. Why wouldn't women be interested in role-playing games? And this is because traditional role-playing games are about two things. One, character progression and building up. Achievement, right? Being able to get things done. Whether you're a fighter in a traditional D&D setting who wants to improve his THAC0, get better equipment, gain more HP, or a mage who wants to get access to higher level spells, increase the size of the spell book, all these things. I mean, this is a very male-oriented activity. Self-improvement, effectively, and achievement, becoming greater than you already are. It's a kind of evolutionary spandrel of the desire for status, although it's been transposed to the fantasy world of pen and paper, Dungeons and Dragons in this case, or some other role-playing game. Now, this wasn't always the case. I mean, for example, you had games like Vampire the Masquerade, which I think, based on some anecdotal stuff I've seen, had more of a female player base, and this is because it was less about level progression, more about other things. So the borders, as it were, are a bit wishy-washy to some degree, but as I've argued in previous years, and argue here, that women, generally speaking, are much less concerned about achievement and status. They don't need it. They have uteri and can bear children, and they're also much more interested in sort of social interaction and relationships. But the traditional pen and paper game, the RPG, and the RPG transposed to the computer, originally at least, was one, of course, very much focused on the same thing. Level progression, improvement in abilities, spells, and an overarching story. Now, people aren't going to like what I have to say, but I think I can make a good argument for why women are less interested in story, coherence, cohesion, and integrity than men are on average. Now, if you extrapolate the male desire to understand the world and how things work, the mechanical, onto the storytelling itself and the composition of a story, the individual elements that put together make up a story, you really are dealing effectively with a kind of mechanics. What are the elements that go in the story? Is it coherent? Does it all fit? You know, I mean, obviously a bit anecdotal, but how many women are really interested in understanding how the washing machine works if it's broken, or they just want it fixed, or a computer, or any of these things? The same can be said for a story. Now, over the years, in addition to the dumbing down I talked about, there's been a deviation from storytelling where the story is integral and well-woven together. There are a few exceptions. I think overall the story of Witcher 3 was quite good. None of these issues that you encounter with BioWare. But then again, Witcher 3 was not tremendously popular with women. Now, you could argue that was because it was a male protagonist, okay, but still, generally not the flavor of the month or the year for most women. So it begs the question, in moving towards BioWare games, why BioWare has the largest female player base of any AAA company. I mean, apart from the obvious, the SJW stuff, catering to diversity and inclusion, and women, of course, are very concerned with inclusion on average compared to men. Recall my video on the difference in morals, generally speaking, these moral tendencies between men and women. Men being more concerned with justice, and women being more concerned with fairness. Well, that's part of it. But more importantly, women are much more concerned with just relationships, just having relationships with people. Not necessarily sexual or romantic ones, but just relationships, interaction. And BioWare increasingly has moved in this direction of a variant of soap opera. In the case of Mass Effect, space opera, which it's always sort of been, but the coherence of the story has been lost over time. It started to go down the tubes in Mass Effect 2, and I liked Mass Effect 2 a lot, albeit for other reasons, and Mass Effect 3 was a mess. And I just watched the official trailer for the latest installment of Mass Effect, and we haven't been given a single reason why we're exploring this new galaxy as a fight for a new home. Kind of reminds me of Commander Shepard Fight for the Lost. Well, okay. That at least made sense in that context. And so I think when women get involved in RPGs, like when women get involved in anything, things change. Because women are different from men. They're not the same, and they have different desires and wants. And I would make an educated guess here to suggest that if women were to expand their dominion, as it were, into the gaming world of AAA games, let's say CD Projekt Red got taken over by SJW/women, more female-inclined interests, you would see the same development, to put it mildly, in those companies in terms of the games that they produce. Story integrity would suffer because relationships are more important. So you notice, for example, very interesting in Dragon Age Inquisition, that some of the stories are not too bad of the individual people. As much as I didn't like Cassandra, didn't find her attractive, found her, she had a pretty interesting story overall. She wasn't a overly simplistic character, but then once again, that's that sort of interpersonal relationship. The overarching story of Dragon Age Inquisition was an abomination, as in it was poorly told, didn't make a lot of sense, and there wasn't too much coherence. But, who cares? Because, relationships with people, you can talk to people and what have you. And I think this goes hand in hand with the, catering to the masses. I mean, if you're going to cater to women to any large extent, you're going to end up in a not too dissimilar situation that their interests will be more well represented than male interests. Now, of course, game companies haven't completely given up the idea of leveling up or achievement. Males will probably always make up the bulk of AAA game fans and customers, but generally speaking, I think we can make this observation that women have different interests as they pertain to role-playing games. And you think back at something like Baldur's Gate 2, which is very much about achievement, discovery, also leveling up. You had your relationships, but they were fairly secondary to the main quest. And I think that's the right way to go. I mean, me being a male, I think that's more important. I've always liked some of the space opera elements of Mass Effect, and I enjoyed Dragon Age Origins. But even in Dragon Age Origins, as much as you had that sort of relationship thing going with a lot of them and the banter, which women dig, you still had the main purpose of what you were doing, and it was a reasonably coherent thesis offered. You got to deal with the archdemon, unite people, sacrifice yourself or not. So, I think that all of this considered, that women in fact do have an impact on role-playing games. Notice when they're not involved in recent crowd-funded projects, be they Pillars of Eternity, Tyranny. I haven't played Tides of Numenera, but Torment Tides of Numenera, but I imagine there wouldn't be too much of that either. Because I think on average, women are not very interested in intricate plots and story coherence, in the same sense that they're not interested in the components of a computer or meteorological phenomena or how the washing machine works or whatever. They're much more concerned with these interpersonal relationships. And subtly, and not so subtly, you see in a company such as BioWare, that's where it drifted. Now, you could argue that even Witcher 3 was about relationships, the sort of or adopted daughter of Geralt in some sense. But that I would argue that wasn't the primary purpose. The journey itself was a purpose, defeating the Wild Hunt and engaging in all these quests and what have you. The relationship is important, obviously, very important, but it's not that he's a loner. He's a lone wolf, no pun intended, white wolf, lone wolf. So the whole we're going to hang out and the crewmates and have relationships with them and romance them, that's very much a BioWare thing. And I think that's mostly a female thing. Obviously, more women play Sims, for example, than men do. It's just their interest. Now, I'm not going to say this is objectively bad necessarily, but we need to be honest with ourselves if we're male gamers that the incoherence in what happened to Mass Effect and what appears to be the case in Mass Effect Andromeda, because I'm just frankly speaking lost as to why we're exploring. In the recent trailer, they say fight for a new home. Why though? This is pre-Reapers, right? So, or at least people that are not aware of the existence of the Reapers, or they haven't invaded yet. So why are we doing this? It's not exactly clear. It's possible that this might be made clear during the game, but I don't expect it. The trailer makes it look like an action flick, with relationships and that sort of thing, and it appeals to a lot of people. The average male will find it appealing because maybe the action is cool and he can shoot stuff, and the female gamer will find it appealing because you can form relationships with people and pursue that. In the middle of all of this, of course, there are those of us who think that the story might be sacrificed and it just doesn't make sense, and all the lore has been thrown out the window. In many ways, I've made my peace with this, and I've stated this before, that, I'm going to be playing Mass Effect Andromeda in all likelihood if I'm still alive and haven't dropped dead and have the time. But I have no expectation, and I'm not going into the game thinking that it's going to be some amazing role-playing experience. I think you'll have a lot of these soap opera-style experiences with the game, and there might be some good action, and it looks fun, but beyond that, I don't have any expectation. Quite different from what I expect from Cyberpunk 2077, in which I expect, we're going to be introduced to this world, I guess. You can choose your own character and hero, from what I understand, and it's going to be a well-told story, a well-woven together story. I've come to expect nothing less than that of CD Projekt Red, not so much with BioWare. So, in conclusion, or moving towards a conclusion, women's interest in the interpersonal and the social seem, in fact, to have indeed had an effect on certain genres of games, particularly with regards to BioWare, where the premise of a story is thrown out, the cohesion of the story is thrown out. Also, we can have relationships with people. I mean, exploring for the sake of exploring is not really a good storytelling device, I find, and it doesn't matter how many relationships you have with people. Will it be a fun game? Probably, but I think I've said this many times, but BioWare is probably long gone in this regard. But it is important to highlight these differences. Just as women tend to choose different heroes in competitive games like Overwatch and just have different interests in games in general. When it comes to RPGs, women definitely have had an impact and will continue to do so. Anyway, thank you for tuning in, and I'll check you out later in the not-too-distant future. Bye-bye, and take care. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.